Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yes, that's great. I'm so sorry about the inconvenience with the tech. It's just nerve-wracking. It's bothersome for you, but it's terrifying for me. So
We understand. Don't worry about it.
I do software, I don't do hardware. That's why I like the cloud. So thank you very much for having me along, and thank you very much to the whole team for inviting me along. Now, my thing is data, and I think when I look at organizations, one thing that bothers me is the sort of lack of automation, the things that would make everyone's lives easier, particularly for the data people. So I thought what I'd love to do is share with you some ideas and strategies on how to help your organizations to get better with their data. Now, does anybody here feel sometimes that they are living in Excel hell? Okay. All right, you're my people. I've come all this way from the UK and hopefully be able to help solve a little bit of that. So my name's Jennifer Stirrup. I'm Scottish. I can't do anything about the accent. So I am sorry about that. But I have heard that my voice is really relaxing and makes people go to sleep. So if that's you, that's fine. We'll wake you up at the end. Okay, that's me, a younger me, admittedly, but I need to do something about that. Okay, so it seems to me that the world is slowly converging. We're starting to see, as a data person, I'm seeing more and more DevOps, and it makes me happy. And the reason for that is I want to save people time and energy and stress. What you bring to the table is the ability for people to go home a bit earlier and spend more time with their families. What you do is really important, and you can be that person that makes your colleagues' lives just easier. And that's why I think I'm just so glad to come here to this conference, because I thought it's easy sometimes when we're sitting behind our screens to forget the impact that we're having on our organization and also and other people as well, and your colleagues around you. So the way that I look at it is it's really important to think about the value that you bring to the table and also the value that your organization gives to their customers as well. And you're part of that story. Value is whatever is meaningful to your organization. So I know we get these awful mission statements. I'm sure if you're part of a larger company, you've been made to sit through these, quite frankly, awful presentations by your CEO when he talks about the mission statement. And they're trying to bring you behind something to energize you towards a particular point. I don't know if you see this, but I see organizations where people are pointing in different directions. So the business teams are not happy with IT, and sometimes the security people just aren't happy with anybody. So you see lots of bun fights around the place, and people are not pointing in the same direction. But what you do is really help in the whole automation process, helping people to get their data out more quickly and faster. And that's where Excel starts to come in. Personally, I love Excel, but I don't like how it's used. So one year, someone sent me a Christmas spreadsheet, which was made up of Excel. And when you clicked the filters, these little Christmas lights flipped up in different colors. They'd done all these wonderful lookups and had made this incredible Christmas card version of an Excel worksheet. Now, what a horrible waste of someone's time, really. But that's the sort of effects that Excel has on people. You will be trying to prise it out of people's cold blue fingers. They will not let that go. So you have to work with that somehow. So how can we do that? In case you're wondering, I couldn't respond to the person who sent me the Christmas card. I just, other than thank you. And if that was you and you're in the audience, I'm really sorry. I hope you learned your lesson. So the thing is, I know I'm standing here in front of all you good people, but I'm actually really introverted. And I think something I see a lot in IT departments, techie people, is we tend to, I think, to be quite introverted. We're happy behind a computer. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how I am myself. Much easier to sit and to look at the screen because it's not, it's a problem that we can solve. And I think the hardest part of any technology, any architecture, is actually the people. And I'll give you an example, my favorite Excel example. I've got so many war wounds being in IT for 25 plus years. I'm surprised I'm still upright. The Norwegians have got a word for upright and not crying. And I think sometimes that's where a lot of IT people suddenly feel, surrounded by lots of business people wanting their reports. I dealt with one organisation who has problems with their spreadsheets. And they said, we've got a problem with this column. And all it was the median. It should have been easy to calculate. So when you think back to your high school maths, you put the data in ascending order. The median is the one in the middle. I know you're all thinking median mode. Why is she telling me this? Well, this organisation were not able to calculate the median properly. What they'd done was they had two columns of data. They had a column of case numbers, and they had another column which was the length of time it took to solve these support cases. Now, they wanted the median, but what they didn't do was sort the data properly. So any time they sorted the first column, they thought that the middle one in the other column was the median. But of course, if you sort that, it changes all the time. So the support cases ended up anything from 90 median days down to something like 25. And I said to them, well, this isn't true. I've fixed your spreadsheet, and the median is actually this column of numbers, and you use the median formula. It turned out they had been struggling with the median for over 2 years. And I asked them, so what happened 2 years ago to make you go to the median? And they said, well, we tried to calculate the mean, the average, before that for 2 years. And eventually we gave up and went to the median. So coming back to why we want to deal with people, and we want to deal with computers and not people, is because people do things like that. So, and I wish this story never happened. I really do. Because I had my best consulting face on, and I earned my money that day showing them how to calculate the median. So I explained this to them. And so I was in the organisation about a month later, and they sent round this newsletter. And I thought, okay, a waste of paper. It was on the desk. But something caught my eye. And it said, due to extra effort, the IT department have managed to reduce the median time to solve support cases from 90 down to 7. And that was because I'd fixed the spreadsheet. It's absolutely nothing to do with their effort. You know, sometimes you just have to go for a walk. This was one of those moments. So this is why I think in IT we're sometimes introverted and sometimes we become introverted because we don't want to hear of this stuff happening. Now, I'm sure you've got your own war wounds and battle stories of your own experience in IT. And perhaps during the breaks, when you're networking with each other, perhaps as a way to get to know one another, just share some of these war wounds. You'll find people who understand. I promise you. So we don't like dealing with people always, but business teams focus a lot on being data-driven. Has anybody heard that word before? Yeah, I don't like it. It's awful. I wish people would stop using it. They keep saying, oh, we want to be data-driven, but then they produce spreadsheets like the one I just mentioned. So it's like data-driven, it just really means delegating responsibility to whichever is on the spreadsheet. Yeah, I don't want to make a decision, so I'm going to get the data to do that for me. And if the data's wrong, then that's not my fault. I made the decision on faulty data. So that's everyone else's fault, not mine. So when we're looking at automating data pipelines, when we're starting to look at DevOps and starting to look at PowerShell, these tools are really helpful for making sure that the pipelines run or error if they don't run. And that's really important because otherwise we're just trying to move data around and we can't be sure that it's been moved around correctly. I did some work in Africa a number of years ago, and so what happens there is the network where I was living was actually quite faulty, keeps going in and out. So data transfers are really hard. So you have to think about the sad path as well as the happy path. I mean, for me personally, I think if someone starts talking about the sad path, what could go wrong, that to me tells me they're experienced in IT. I sometimes go into sort of like a hired gun to sort of interview people for smaller companies. And if they start telling me the happy path, but not the sad path, then I know that they've not been in IT long enough to become bitter like the rest of us. So I tend to put them down towards the list, you know. So what we are looking at is being insights driven. We want someone to come along and say, oh, actually, that data doesn't look right. I did some work for a car manufacturer, and I was leading a team globally, and they showed me a report that said we have sold 2 million cars in the last month in the UK. I said, there's only 65 million people in the UK. How could that possibly be? You know, you've got such a high percentage of the population buying a car from one brand in a month. I think your data is wrong. So, but the thing is, by knowing even descriptive statistics, you can be that person who points these kind of things out. I did some work for the National Health Service, and what I noticed was I just did a really simple descriptive statistics. The data was supposed to show how many nights someone has spent in hospital with a particular condition. But when I did the min, I noticed that the minimum number was minus 178, and I thought, how can you spend minus 178 nights in hospital? So anyway, I went back and someone had swapped around the start and the end date. Really easily done. So the patients had left hospital before they arrived. So all a bit strange. So the thing with that is doing those really simple tests actually get you really far because people will do silly things with data. And hopefully through automation, we can help save people from themselves. I told you I was bitter, but that's really what happens. So an innovation strategy. Now, because you're automating, I like to think you're at the forefront of the organizational efforts to lift up the organization to do better. And so when people talk about innovating, you hear words like fail fast and innovation. But an organization's attitudes to their data tells you a lot about how they think about innovation. So if an organization is in Excel 97, they're probably not very innovative. And it's absolutely true that I sometimes come across people who are seriously using software built in the last century. And of course, the first thing you have to say is, look, you have to upgrade. My company won't afford me to do that. But honestly, if that happens, I would just move companies. Because Excel 97 is like, please use software that was built in this decade, and then we can start to talk. So some companies are really poor at innovation, and you see it in the data. So maybe if you think about your own organizations, maybe think about their attitudes to data. Are people still using really old software? Have they got data in Excel that's just hiding? Now, I will say that there's a real place in the world for mainframes. You've probably heard of COBOL, so one of the most highly paid skills in IT at the moment, because a lot of systems are built in it and they need to be decommissioned. So, it's a true story that there is a cycle, you know, things go and things come back. But I think for me, the whole attitude towards data is interesting because people bring themselves to it in the way that they don't tend to when they're thinking about a software upgrade or move to the cloud. People will tell you their opinions. It's a bit like soft furnishings or like a clothes sense, a dress sense. People all have got their own opinions, and you can really see that when they start to look at reports. They'll say, I don't like that, I don't like the pie chart, I don't like the colour, I don't like something about this report. And what they often mean is, I don't like what this report is telling me. So you have to be really careful what they're saying, and it's really interesting. It's all about people, really, technology, and data particularly so. Now, things have changed in the industry. When I was growing up, my dad, for example, went to work and came back from work. Work was a place he went to. But now that's really changed. Work is something that we do regardless of where we are. We've gone from being information workers to being knowledge workers, where we have to define the problem and then we have to solve it. So we're constantly learning as we go. We're learning workers. We all should be learning in technology. We probably all are. That's why you're here. Learning is so important. So because of that, people can sometimes get things wrong in technology. We see that. I've told you some examples. But we're thinking about how can we use data to give people the insights to help them to drive their organization forward. So I'll give you an example. Is anybody here, you have come across Play-Doh, the child's toy? Yeah. When I think about it, I can smell it. I don't know about you. So Play-Doh, believe it or not, was actually invented by accident. It was supposed to be wallpaper paste, a wallpaper cleaner, because at the time in Victorian times, wallpaper was a new thing. So people needed tools to clean the wallpaper. So these two brothers actually set up Play-Doh because they wanted desperately to try and find a wallpaper cleaner that would stick to the wall and sort of take the grime off it. So they failed miserably because they had all these dough balls kept falling onto the floor. And one of them, their wives came along and she said, oh, don't throw those out. I'll use those for kindergarten tomorrow. So she added food colouring to the leftover dough, took it into kindergarten, and it was just such a hit with all the kids. They loved it. So sometimes what you think your company's doing, in this case, wallpaper cleaner, is actually completely different from what customers actually want from you. It's the same product, the exact same thing, but two very different audiences, very different purposes. But you can only see that, I think, in the data that sparks an idea. Sometimes people get ideas and the organization doesn't listen, but sometimes if the data is telling you something, you have to go and at least explore and examine that. So another example is candles. Have you got Yankee candles here? Yeah. Little glass jars with the candle inside it. Now in the UK we had Price's candles. They were going since the early 19th century. And they produced these little tea lights. Really popular. It was just like the basic thing that you bought. And then Yankee candles came along and nearly put Price candles out of business because Price sold a product. They sold you a candle. Whereas Yankee candles sold you an experience, relaxing, spa, something to give someone as a present. Same product, different interpretations. The data told them that's what their audiences were looking for. So where you come in actually is really important because you're trying to get the data to the people that need it really fast. And they're actually under a lot of pressure. So who are these people I'm talking about? So enter Darth Vader. I'm not going to try and do an impression. Someone can do that for me later. But when you're thinking about the people in the business, maybe thinking about Darth Vader and having some sympathy for him is actually maybe a challenge, but it's something to think about. Because when you think about Darth Vader and his managerial skills, he's got to manage stormtroopers, he's got fighters he's got some rebels, bounty hunter contractors that are coming after him. He's got to think about that. He's got some really strong, powerful clients, the emperors, and he's got to manage somehow his decisions based on the force, on instinct. And he has to do all this without his data. So I sometimes think managers are a bit like Darth Vader in some ways, with the sort of pressures that are on them. They've got all these pressures on them, and they have to try and do good, trying to please people with just a sense of gut and, other people attacking them. So when we think about Darth Vader, sometimes we can think about how can we improve things so our Darth Vaders, our own Darth Vaders, can actually get the data that they're looking for. Because when business people are trying to approach you, sometimes they feel that IT is very overwhelming. I actually spoke to a customer this week, and she said, when I talk to the tech guys, they use lots of vocabulary I don't understand. I feel diminished, I feel small, and I have to go and back off. So that means that I have to go in and sort out the issue. But people shouldn't feel like that, I think. And I think I talk a bit about diversity and inclusion, and that's why it's important. When I go out to my car and switch it on, I don't need to know engine theory to see that it works. I can hear it, I can put it to gear, and off we go. So I think it's the same with technology as well. We're helping people to get what they need, and hopefully just treating them and seeing the bigger picture in the context that they are living in. Because when they come across technology, they can feel like this. You may have heard of the ball of mud architecture. So you end up with a ball of yarn as well, where you're trying to untangle everything. And this is where Excel comes in, because you've got data all over the place, hiding in people's laptops. Has anyone here heard of Data Lake? Data Lake come across? Your organizations probably have got one. And basically the idea is an unstructured store of data. You can store lots of different types of data in it. And that's what people aspire to. A single pane of glass is what we hear. But the reality is organizations might have a technical data lake, but the reality is they've got lots of data puddles. And those puddles are Excel. They're all over the place, and they will get the organization muddy, and they will lose things, they'll jump in it and think they know what they're doing. So I think with Excel, it's a symptom of people not getting the data. It's not the cause. So what we're trying to do is think about how can we actually help people be at that intersection of people, process, technology, and data. Now, data underpins all of these. It's so important. And personally, I think knowing about data is a really good career choice. Of course, I would say that. But actually, I found I kind of fell into data, actually. I actually learned to code when I was about 8 years old. And I should have got out more, but I didn't. So I used a really old, you didn't have them here. It was the Sinclair computers, ZX81. So I used one of those, and we had 16 KB of RAM, because we couldn't afford the 32. I got it from a shop called Radio Shack, and I got it from there. And the reason I got it was because my dad fixed things for Radio Shack, and he said, I can't get this to work, I think. I'll have to hand it back or just trash it. And then he said, well, we'll try and keep it. And he got it working for me. So it's his fault I'm here today. So if you're not happy, you need to go and have a word with him. But so that's where my love for coding. I was an 8-year-old at school talking about hexadecimal, and the teachers didn't know what to do. So, but I fell in love with data at an early age. And I think that's why, for me personally, diversity and inclusion are important, because you can be that person that helps that young girl who wants to learn to program or to do something, to make something with her own hands. And it's just a nice thing to do. So when you're thinking about your business, the organization you work for, whether you work for yourself or someone else, you can start to focus on the vital few. And what that really means is, what is important to my business? What do customers think? What's our ambitions? Do we want to grow globally? And how can we grow together? We also want to think about the voice of the customer and the data. So where you come in actually is you can really facilitate getting the right data to the right people at the right time in the right format. Now, it sounds like we should have nailed that. I mean, computers have been around for so long. Why haven't we done it yet? And it's really tough for people to handle and analyze lots of data. But if they don't have it in the first place, they're not going to get very far. So what I see for you is an opportunity to get involved and to really help the organization to make their data work for the business vision. So that was just a little thought to try and help you to see where the organization's coming from. Because we want to deliver our data with care, and we want to make sure it's trustworthy. We don't want spreadsheets with the wrong median calculation in it. We're trying to do better. So I don't know if you've come across the term shadow IT. You probably have a lot of it in your organizations. I like the term shadow IT, but I kind of prefer the term shadow data, because there'll be lots of data in the organization hidden in pockets. And if you can find those, you can start to automate where this data is coming from and where should it be going to. Or often the data is coming from exports from source systems, and then it's been jammed together in Excel spreadsheets. And then people lose it, or they don't do it right, they make mistakes. Because Excel has legs and it needs to be secured, and it usually isn't. One of my customers came up to me after a conference and they said, "How can we tell where Excel has gone?" Now, very long story short, someone had rented data from a third party, was in an Excel spreadsheet, and they thought, "I know, I'll share that data with my friend in another department." So that's what they did. Now, because it was a useful piece of data, ended up going around the organization and actually ended up in the company's website. And it was confidential, it was not supposed to be there. So the very first lawyer's letter they got was, "Get our data off the website now." The second letter they got was, "Get the data out of your databases," because they had put it all over the place. And the third letter said, "Get the data out of your data centers," which were all over the place. So actually, one Excel spreadsheet caused absolute mayhem. And I think where you come in is to automate the data so people don't need those spreadsheets as much. They won't remove them forever, but you can be part of that story of helping people to think bigger than Excel. Think about that pane of glass, putting data together, raising an alarm if the data hasn't got to the right place. So I've mentioned a bit about Excel hell. I'm sure a lot of people here have heard of Power BI. Okay. Now, I love Power BI, but I'd also say that there's a real risk of being in Power BI hell as well as Excel hell, because you've got it in the desktop, people can send PBI files around, and what you could be doing is replacing one thing with another, not really solving the problem. So if people have got pots of puddles around the place, you might find Power BI puddles. One reason for that is, I have to say, this is that Microsoft licensing for Power BI is pretty confusing. So people don't always go for it because they're confused by the price and how it actually works. We also have to think about where we are focusing our efforts. And so another pressure on your Darth Vader, your people you work for, is that they've got a fear of missing out. They should be seen as the champion of the data in the organization, but it's really hard to do that. So if you're looking to sort of progress in your career, becoming really familiar with what the tools like PowerShell, DevOps, what they can do to help support businesses get their data is actually really important. I know that in my own experience, it helped me to move up the ladder quite quickly because I knew the data. The CEOs, the C-suite needed their reports, they needed their data, and I was one of the few people that knew what the data looked like. I could interpret it. I knew what happens when the data pipelines failed, for example. And actually, knowing data means you know the lifeblood of the organization, and it helps you to connect and build a network for yourself. I sometimes find that people talk about, they build little empires for themselves. They're the person that does this, they're the one who does that. And that's fine up to a point, but when an organisation starts to grow, it's harder for people to build their little empires and keep them. At some point, you have to collaborate and work with other team members so that you become more than just one person that knows one thing. In my own experience, I tend to find that the more information you give away, particularly about data, means that you become the go-to person in the organisation while actually knowing more than one thing. It's a quite difficult transition to make, but using data is actually really important as a key to success, and for you as well as your organisations as well, because I see data FOMO all the time, and leaders that are still in Excel, but they've been promised great insights from their data and they're not getting anywhere. It's because data is a change agent. You can actually use it to help change the organisation. I gave you an example of Play-Doh a moment ago. So actually what the data tells you, your feedback from your customers, is actually can help open up new markets or new opportunities, or to drop things that are just not working for the organisation. So people get very invested in that. So one thing I'd suggest is the transparency is really important. I always find giving away more information means you become more influential in your business. You become that change agent, the go-to person. And the way to do that is transparency. And sometimes as an IT person, we're not comfortable with that. I've worked on lots of projects with developers who won't make a project plan or contribute to one, because they will say, I need to figure out what I'm doing, and they'll say things like, it will be done when it's done, and it's really hard because they're not being transparent. Now, what they're doing is empiring their knowledge, but what they're also doing is isolating themselves, and I see this in organisations quite a bit. I see somebody recently who would engage in project discussions, and actually the rest of the team changed the entire architecture, and that person was left behind. And it's a real shame. So I think that transparency lets people trust you. That's why I think show and tells are really important. In Agile, people need to be able to see it in order to trust it. So how can you help your organisation to deliver that data with care and trust? Now, one way to do it is to think about looking after the data properly, making sure it's disposed of properly. So an example on the way here, actually, as I was going through the airport, they take your biometric information, so I obviously passed, they let me in. So a bit glad about that. But what it did say, there was a big sign up that says, if you are a US citizen, your facial image will be deleted after 90 days. It didn't say what happens if you're not a US citizen, but that's okay. I've got nothing to hide, I'm really not that interesting. So I'm quite happy for them to have pictures of my face. It doesn't really matter. I'd be more interested in how they store the data than anything else. So what you're trying to do is thinking about data lineage as well. The thing is with those Excel spreadsheets is you get data dumps. But people don't know how they were generated, where do they come from? I'm helping an organisation at the moment, and I'd heard of 9 different data sources. I spoke to another person who said, oh, that's another data source that nobody had ever heard of in IT. So when the business and the IT teams don't trust one another, there can be a real problem. I worked with one organisation where the whole finance team put in an entire new telephone system and didn't tell IT about it. And the only way IT found out about it was because when someone in finance made a support call, an IT team ran upstairs to see what they were talking about. New phones, a new system. And they had done it all themselves. And I think the reason for that was there was just such a disconnect between the organisations. So being transparent really helps. Also, probably sounds a daft thing, but knowing about problems before the business teams do is really important. I don't know how many times I've heard from business teams saying, oh, I can't access my reports, or the data's not refreshed, and they're the ones to tell you. So actually building those pipelines that alert people if they fail, it's really important. It's thinking about the SAD path. So visualizations and reporting. Now, again, people tend to come to visualization, data visualization, they bring themselves to it. And they might not like this. Some people will want a table, some will want a pie chart, some will want a bar chart. But if you can get the data to the right people and give them something like Power BI, they can then build their own dashboards. You're trying to be the enabler in the organization. So just a few tips before I wrap up and start to let you go for your break. Sometimes organizations aren't doing as well as they used to. Sometimes that's external factors. Sometimes I hear people in organizations saying things like, things were much better 9 years ago before we moved to the cloud. So I don't think that's true, but I do think that trying to think about what was the organization doing when it was doing things really well. How did we slip away from that, and how do we get back to that? The data is at the heart of that, because it can help you to help your organization make those better decisions. So start as you mean to go on. So I put in a Star Wars-esque type quote. Once you start down the dark path, forever it will dominate your destiny. Because it's sometimes really hard to pull people back when they've started down the wrong path. And I do see this. So that's why I like agile methodologies. I know they're not always popular, but they allow the business to see what's going on and to tell you if you're going off in the wrong direction. Very easily done. So choosing your battles. So what I mean by this is sometimes with the business teams, if they're happy in Excel, then you can give them Excel, but you can also do other things so it's easier for them to get that data. I think also when people are looking at engaging with business teams, it can be tough to know or to really understand what the business are telling you and what the pressure is. I hear a lot from organizations who want to switch systems off and then start up other systems, and they want a plan for that. So that's the sort of thing I can help them with. But then you get huge resistance from business teams. Don't switch that off. We need it for our reports. So what happens is organizations end up running 2 systems, or sometimes even 3, doing the same thing. I worked with one organization that had 3 sales ledgers, which was really tough. And they actually ended up in a lot of trouble because they didn't know which one held the correct tax. So they ended up, it's a few years ago now, I don't think they ever worked out how much tax they need to pay. It went on for years. I assume IRS do similar things here. You don't want to get into trouble with them. So I think for me, it's a good mindset to have is don't be afraid to fail, but be afraid not to try. And try and means sometimes you find out 10 things along the way as you go on. So I think to summarise, having that sort of business first attitude is really great for your careers, but it really helps you to deliver that trust with care as well, because you're doing such an important thing for the business by supporting them and helping them to really be very careful when they're handling their data. I think people think it's like Google, they just type in something and get a bunch of data back, and actually it doesn't work like that. If you've ever tried to put together 2 spreadsheets, then they don't match, then you can start to see how tough it begins. So a few ideas really just to suggest. Look for those repetitive tasks to help people with their data, to move the data around, to reduce human error. It sounds easy moving data around, but actually it can fail halfway through. It might not be the right data source. I had one organisation load June in twice. The month of June in the data once, and then they did it again. It's because they never changed it. They didn't do any updates, so it was July. So the numbers were identical, but nobody noticed because the number of rows was kind of correct. So these are the sort of things that are really easily done. It's about that consistent process. I like to think about people getting their data in a way that they don't have to think about the technology. The dashboards just appear and they will love you for it. I promise you they will absolutely love you for it. So I'm not really going to show any code. I had a few examples. How can you help people by keeping their data secure? Oh, I can't tell you how many, it's a whole session in its own, how many times I see people doing silly things with data. I dealt with one organisation who had to report themselves twice to the government because they lost data. The second time the government said, oh, you're getting so much better at reporting yourself for all of your data breaches. And when the CTO came to me and said, look, they've made a compliment, I thought, no, that's a backhanded slap. That's what that is. And then I am not kidding you, but I wish he was. 5 minutes later, he said, I can't find my USB stick that was sitting here. And I just thought, here we go, not again. They'd just been fined £150,000 for losing some DVDs in the post. They sent them first class Royal Mail. I don't know what your post is like here, but in the UK, that doesn't fly. You know, you're never going to see it again. So you have to think about being really careful with the data and not incurring those £150,000 fines. So you can think about principles for data confidence, helping organisations be confident in their data. Because if they're not comfortable with some of it, what happens is they're not comfortable with all of it. And it's so easy to lose confidence in their data because they're using that to make decisions. And that's why they end up in Excel hell or Power BI hell. So a quick summary, survival strategies. We are living in a volatile, uncertain world with all of our data and technology constantly moving. But looking for the wins that help people and being really, really focused on the business will help the organisation so much. We're all here because we're lifelong learners, so I don't need to tell you that. But research and development is important. Just try things, see how you go. And gather your troops like a Jedi Knight. I think the most important skill in technology is empathy, actually. I can teach people how to code, and so can you. Everybody can do that. But you can't teach them to have empathy for you or for other people, and that's really important when we're thinking about data-oriented systems in particular. So being customer first will help your business, but it will also help you to think about how you can help yourself to help the organisation to make the data work. So if you weren't interested in data before, I hope you are now, and welcome to the dark side of science, data science. So I had to bring up Darth again. But thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure. Any questions, let me know. Thank you.